Okay, so our first point is political party overshadows women's agenda. We have fashionized women and youth participation, as in we are there as social media people to mobilize instead of what we're supposed to do. But we need to be very severe on what is called political cults. What is happening inside there, and the godfathers and people who have brought you in, sometimes it's hard to carry the agenda. We look at who am I need to sacrifice, or do I need to compromise? But also, youth are given opportunities with no funds. It's like, come in the youth wing, come, we are all youth here, by the way. Come in the youth wing, come here, Flora, you can do it, you are able, you can stand. And then I go in, I need one godfather to help me. Powers are only in papers when we are in the positions, but also there is this notion of women don't support women, whether within or outside, but we need to understand one woman's wrong is everybody's wrong. Like there'll be one person in leadership position, when she does it wrong, then it's every day in my home I need to hear how wrong this person is. So sometimes it's hard to even push the agenda forward. And one person, like our colleague, the panelist said, we need the numbers, but right now, even affirmative actions didn't bring us numbers. And the numbers that are there, they are not bringing us, evidence-based advocacy. So sometimes we need solidarity first before the numbers. And this comes even in Beijing. As we are celebrating Beijing, those women, those are Beijing members, went to Beijing after they are tired. So when they went there, they had a voice. They were like tired of structural adjustment programs. They are like, we are going to fight. So it was easy to have that solidarity. And another thing, ethnicity and tribalism. So there was an example that sometimes people go back to ideologies that matter than patriotism. So sometimes it's hard to push these agendas inside. And when we say the economic side of women, women are rich. Guy, if at all there is an issue, there is a social issue happening, a woman can move her wrapper, can sell anything for that social issue. Leadership is not our agenda in our social issue. That's why when it comes to a woman needs to become a leader, it's her issue and her family, and there are imamus, people. But when it comes, she needs to take someone, a child needs to, she's giving birth, she's having a celebration, women will come out for that. So if you say women are not economically stable to help each other, to support each other, to vie in leadership position, no, we can support each other. Did I say what we were? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I love how you've tied it to the economy. And I don't know whether there's a forum for African women millionaires and billionaires, but maybe something to look into. Let's move on to the next table over there. I think they have finally resolved and appointed an official spokesperson. So we'll come back there. Yeah.
So I think we're just trying to display a solidarity in my group. Okay, so for us, we discussed quite a number, and some of the things we discussed were leveraging on hanging fruits of religion, such as making reference to scriptures that reference women, and then bringing those religious leaders to the table as a strategy of advocacy to challenge the downsides of our religion. Because we heard from Honorable Shabalala today, she made us to understand why we are fighting each other, Islam and Christians, when it was all a strategy of the colonials. And then we also talk about gender mainstreaming in all public affairs of the governance, such as all MDAs and ministries having a gender desk, so that we can be able to hold account the governments that are ruling us in Africa. We also spoke about reinforcing the place of history, writing our own history, because you see the history we have, honestly, as Africans is bastardized. I am from Nigeria, and one of the longest rivers in Africa is in Nigeria, the River Niger. But as a child, I was meant to understand that Mungo Park discovered the Niger. So it makes you keep asking, where were the people of the Niger when Mungo Park came? Because people were obviously there. So we are no longer sharing our own history. And apart from sharing this history, we have to tell our own stories and not let people tell our stories. We have to document them as they are happening, archiving them so that the future generation will be able to make references to this history. We also talked about the intergenerational gap that we have now. And then we talked about the place of mentorship, having intergenerational dialogues. I remember as an African child, I grew up with my grandmother telling me the names of my fathers, the fathers before my father. But then these days, as a young woman, we are so enticed with technology, we hardly have time to go back to our roots, to learn who our fathers were, what they ate and what they did. And also, we have now moved beyond the culture of Africa folk telling and then using the fireside storytelling to now having only global meetings and panel discussions. We can go back to the roots where it all began so that this knowledge will not be lost when our mothers are gone. We also spoke about affirmative actions, vying for leadership position and advocating for quotas, then supporting women who are also vying for leadership position. We discussed the harnessing of knowledge of indigenous women and ensuring that the representation of indigenous women and marginalized women in rural communities are also taken to mind whenever we are planning all these our meetings and also our programming. And then popularizing already existing knowledge of African women. One of the key things that stood up was the presentation from Honorable Shabalala, and we all agree that if we're not in this room, we'll not learn what she has. And if people like her are not made popular, are not put in our curriculum, are not put out there for Africans to see, there's a lot of knowledge that will be lost. This is all we covered. Yeah, thank you very much.
Very, very powerful. Thank you so much. And imagine if the education we were receiving from Ma'am Shabalala earlier was on DSTV, which unfortunately has recently been bought by a French investor, so you all know what that means. But that's why we have YouTube and all these other technologies, right? So maybe we don't have to wait for DSTV to popularize that African story to allow us to occupy those spaces. I'm told that I've been accused of focusing too much on the West, so allow me to also take in our sisters from the East so that there's a geopolitical balance here. There was a hand there, so please let's invite our sisters. We'll take 2 hands from here and then go back to that side. I will not call it. No, please don't raise your voice because there's translation ongoing. So let's get the mic here. Jean, there's a table here that has to.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Loveness Mudzuru. My name is Loveness Mudzuru. I'm a Warsaw Fellow, just in case you had not known that we have Women of the South Speak Out in the house today. So in our group, we were talking about a lot of stuff, but let me try to summarize this up. That some of the things that we mentioned about how we can actually bring in the inclusivity and how we can reimagine inclusive leadership is when we have intergenerational support. We had women sharing on how they were able to get into political spaces and then be able to go back and reimagine how the other people in the other shoes had worked and have those other women by themselves. So a good strategy to have women support in a form of intergenerational network is a necessity when it comes to inclusive leadership. And we also talked about feminist politics is inclusive leadership. Depending on how you define feminist, if you have actually read and understand what feminist is about, it is about inclusive leadership. So we can look at those definitions if we want to get back to what inclusive leadership is about. But definitely some of the issues that we were raising in this group were the issues around, it's not about gender. It's not about me being a woman. It's not about me being a girl, a young woman, or you being a man, or however you identify yourself. It's about us being human. So whatever the conversation's about and how leadership is supposed to be portrayed, it's supposed to be portrayed in a way that we realize and always remember that we are all human and we want the best. There are also other strategies that we mentioned around changing in parenting, where we had some issues and some experiences that have been shared around how even other cultures, like even in Ethiopia, where even girls at their household level, they are not allowed to speak out. Yet in leadership and in politics, to say, there is a lot of voicing out. There is a lot of speaking that needs to be done. So there is those traditional cultures that need to be addressed, and also have men as your partners, but not men but because they are human, not because they are men, but because they are human. So they should be by your side, and also having them and not shunning them away. Some of the strategies that we talked about that can be used to advance women's politics agency to leadership are on the issues around what is your politics really when you get into leadership. If you want to get into leadership and into politics, it's about a collective. It is about collectiveness and what you want to achieve. It's not about you getting into a political party and getting diluted whilst you are in it. So it's just an encouragement as well. We also talked about leadership programs. You know, we have so many leadership programs in Africa. They need to be revisited, see what those are about, because there is need to look at the multi-level leadership programs that are happening depending on the experts of this leader. So women support groups is also something that was mentioned. We have been talking about even safe houses for women and so for psychological support for women, but also women in politics. They need to also know that there is a community that actually supports you. There was an experience that was shared of a woman that actually went to court only to find out that there was no community of women or no women in that court to support her whilst you are in politics. So we applaud these women for being in politics, but they definitely need our back. So we need to develop those women support groups as well in leadership. Then there was that assumption, or not an assumption, but something that is always kicking in every time, that it's not our responsibility as women. Definitely, men, you are here. It's not our responsibility to teach you how to treat us. We are human. It's a matter of you knowing that because you are human and I am human, the way you want to be treated is the way that I would want to be treated as well, as a woman as well. And then there also the need to shift the mindset of having women having to have too many expectations set for them in leadership positions. This has actually made so many other women not want to have this agency for politics and so forth, because also we are not reminding ourselves of the structural and systematic barriers that are also there, and then you have all these things that you are expecting this woman to do whilst she's a leader and so forth, because she's a woman, yet the men are not actually being asked of these kind of responsibilities and expectations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're trading a thin line here of managing solidarity and generosity with constrained resources, aka time. So let's be mindful. Let me just encourage you. We have note takers. We have official note takers. So anything you do not go into detail about, it will still be captured in the final report. So just focus on your 3 top line ideas and avoid repeating anything that has been said before. So we're moving this way like the monsoon. We've started from the east. We're going through that table, and then we'll move that way and get to your table. So don't worry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natasha. I represent the table that had Rita, Felista, Caroline, and Margaret. And our points begin with funding investments to support women during and beyond election cycles. Invest in women. Perhaps we need organizations that directly inject money into women running for political office. Second is to focus on young women and girls. We often find, especially in universities, student councils, political parties focus on young men. We need to be intentional about redesigning our approaches to get young women and girls into leadership early. Third, intergenerational conversations and alliances. We need to ensure that women with a history of working successfully in politics work together with young people. However, there was a caveat that we also need to create spaces where young people can drive their agendas, because sometimes the older female politicians can be gatekeepers. So how do we ensure, one, there are conversations that are intergenerational, but two, when there are blockages, young women still fly? So the question is, we need to bridge the gap between women of different levels of leadership. 4 is focus on local elections. Begin at the grassroots level. Ensure we get as many women as possible elected in local elections, because oftentimes they end up rising through the ranks. Number 5 is preparing women to run for political office. Have practical conversations with women. For example, the organization I represent, Future Elect, has leadership programs where we prepare women to run for political office. Have real conversations about what's going to happen. In Kenya, we have the phrase qua ground, the actual realities of what it will take to run for political office. Are you ready? Not just financially, but emotionally, to take that journey. 6 is behavior change and norm campaigns. Because oftentimes we have an idea about what a political leader looks like, what they should be reflected. And we need to have conversations, especially at the community level, that women make fantastic leaders. They can and should run for political office. Beginning in the family, oftentimes there was conversation here that sometimes the enemy is within, in our own families, in our own communities. We are actually decampaigned by people who know us. So how do we begin changing the conversation that women should run for political office? 7 is engaging the media. Oftentimes how the media depicts women, both by traditional and new media. We need to find ways, one, of owning media houses. How do we ensure that we are creating spaces where we change and shift the conversation, but also hold media stations accountable for when they go out of their way to perpetrate stereotypes about women? And engaging media is not at a very posh national traditional level. How do we get into vernacular stations, community radio, ensuring that we are engaging in languages and ways that relate and are accessible to people at the ground? Learnings, 8 is learnings around women who ran, especially in unprecedented times. The women who ran in the 80s, in the 90s, under conditions that are extremely difficult. How do we tell their stories? Even though they may have risen to become people we don't want to talk about, how do we still tell their stories? Their imperfect stories need to be documented. And examples were given, for example, like Charity Ngilu in Kenya, who ran in the 90s, for those who are old enough to remember, Masani Ngilu. It was a very unprecedented election. So it's important to document these learnings. Number 9 is engaging political parties to encourage them to invest in women and nominate more women. A lot of the women we admire today were nominated by political parties. That is it, and that's what we had from this table. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natasha. That sounded like a whole manifesto, and I love the fact that you presented it in such a short time. Thank you for raising the bar so high. So we'll move to that table and then to the next one, please. Let's get the mic here, Jean. Our colleagues in the South, we haven't forgotten you. It is just that you, as you recall, liberation arrived pretty late in the South, so we'll try and follow the alphabetical order in that sense.
Thank you. So a lot of what we had discussed here has already been said, so I will go by what has been shared earlier, not to repeat thoughts that we've shared already. But I'd like to talk about one of the key things that we mentioned when we had our conversations around political party reform. And I know there's been some thoughts that have been shared on how political parties can be more intentional in recruiting women, but also in making sure they are putting women forward as candidates during elections. But when we talked about political party reform here, we talked about the need for parties to have more inclusive frameworks, right? So making sure that representation of women, representation of young women is not just through party wings, but it's also through other leadership positions and decision-making roles within the party. And we also talked about how political parties can adopt measures that can make men within political parties allies and champions of increased women representation. And a key example that I gave was what we did in the Gambia pilot program on men power politics, where influential men, party leaders, senior male leaders within parties are trained on dismantling gender biases, male biases, but also misconceptions on the representation of women in politics. And another thing we talked about is the socioeconomic and political empowerment of women. So we talked about gender responsive budgeting and ensuring that women have access to finance, not just when they contest for election, but when they're organizing, they're mobilizing within grassroots, within communities as well. And we also talked about the need to take collective action, and collective action in the sense of carrying other women along in these conversations, carrying them along in our efforts to ensure there's increased representation, but also working with them to dismantle the stereotypes that exist, and finally to raise awareness within communities on the need for collective action to be taken, not just by women, but men and women working together collectively to ensure that, and we raise awareness on the significance of women's political representation, but also why it's important for us to build societies that are more inclusive and that uphold the values of equality in political leadership.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for keeping to that standard. So we'll finish with that table before we move to the table over there on the south. So please pass the mic.
Okay. Good day, everyone. My name is Ngala Nadesh, and on this table, on the first part, we say there is need to reiterate what women's rights are and make women know their rights from the grassroots and know that their voices, no matter how little it is, it matters. We should have a gender desk in political parties to enable safety and safe spaces for women. There should be an inclusive act that empowers women with disabilities in rural areas, and implementation should be visible to everyone. We should not just be making bills, policies, but implementation and accountability should be visible to everyone. And as long as the spaces remains insecure, women and women agencies will still be lacking behind. So there is need for safe spaces. There is need for these spaces to be created. All right, others spoke about funding. I also wish to add that, we also wish to add that more funding should be made available, especially for young women who want to venture into politics. All right. Oh my God. Sorry for that. All right, on the second part, we said we should contextualize the approaches that we have all mentioned here. We should contextualize them based on our countries and our cultural norms. Ella spoke about documenting success stories of our leaders. We want to add something a little bit that we can celebrate them each year. We can celebrate each year the Sawubona conference with their names, their success stories, and their challenges, which will help motivate others to venture in such a leadership milieu. We also spoke about women's leadership skills should be respected the way they are. Women are naturally leaders. They have natural leadership skills. We see them in our homes. Our husbands can testify that. We see them in our homes. Women have natural leadership skills. And if they bring these leadership skills on the table, these leadership skills should be respected and allowed, allowing them to lead the way nature made them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It seems also timekeeping is natural for women. So let's finish with the table over there in the south before we... I hope I'll be proved right as we wrap up.
I'm about to prove you wrong. I'm just kidding. Well, because you go last, you know, most of the points will already be spoken about. But we do support the idea of intergenerational dialogue that has been spoken about. We won't go further into that. We also spoke about it here. We also mentioned that it's really important to also support the female leaders that are already in the space, that are already leaders in the political space. But in order to support them, there needs to be a good relationship between women in civil society and women who are already in those positions, because there seems to be a divide between the two. And we need to sort of find ways of holding the line as well as adding on to that. We spoke about, in terms of intergenerational dialogue, we spoke about mentorship. And what I just want to say is to just demonstrate an example of what we are doing as gender links, because, well, I was introduced before as a former politician. But in my new life now, in civil society, I'm from Gender Links. We manage a project that funds fellowships for young women. And in this room today, we have young women from different countries. You've already heard them speak, whom we are funding to come into advocacy spaces and speak up about what is happening in their countries from their lived experiences. So you heard from a fellow from Zimbabwe, Loveness, over there, who already spoke. You heard from Jennifer from Nigeria, who already spoke. You heard from Gala, who spoke. She's from Cameroon. We have Senegal in the house. We have Ethiopia in the house. We have Tanzania in the house. Who did I leave out? We have Ghana in the house and Mali. So we just want to say that, you know, as part of giving, you know, being part of the solution and contributing to young leaders coming into the space, this is what some of our organizations and many others are doing in terms of providing fellowships for young women to be heard and to be in spaces where normally they're not able to fund themselves to be in.
Thanks a lot for proving me right, Tabitha. And I think that speaks also to the challenge Chimwemwe had referred to earlier of mapping out. Thousands of young people from this continent are busy in parts outside of this continent getting all sorts of training on leadership to lead the transformation of this continent on the basis of a theory developed by people who never lived here. And I don't know if we see that as an important challenge. But, and this is why personally I'm extremely supportive of those initiatives that originate here on the continent. Future Elect and all the others, Gender Leaks, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think we need a lot of those. If the American government can spend hundreds of millions of shillings training African leaders, why don't we start reversing that trend so that maybe we, instead of Mandela Washington Fellowship, we could have a Winnie Madikizela Fellowship, no? That's my challenge to you, and I offer my free services for any such program. Wherever it happens, I will bring myself. They say save the best for the last, for last. So we'll invite this table here that has expansive memory and all sorts of power in it to demonstrate to us what it takes to bring all the ideas you've said into a toolbox. I hope that's what they're going to do. I'm sorry for setting the expectations very high, but that's what they did to me when they invited me here. So I believe you've appointed a spokesperson, a spokeswoman, the king of that table, to speak on behalf of the rest of us. So I would like to invite honorable spokeswoman to speak on behalf.
Yeah, because our table is in front, everyone has my back. So before I go into what the table discussed, I actually contracted with Chimwewa that I have a story to share, which I should have shared in the morning. Today is a very historic day in Africa, and if we're going to meet like this and not celebrate it, I would hate myself. I met a young woman in 2018 in South Africa who was living with an ANC member of parliament, and she wanted to get a South African passport and localize. And I was just like, why do you want to live here? You're from Botswana, go back home, you know, and make a change in Botswana. So I said, I need to contract and mentor you on Pan-Africanism. Fast forward, I'll be very brief. In 2 years, I think she was ready. She was a fully bred Pan-Africanist because she said, I'm going back home and I'm going into civil society. I said, okay, now I need to turn you into an Afrocentrist. So by 2023, she said, I am running for politics. I said, yeah, because me, when I first saw you, I knew that my ancestors told me, one day in Botswana, you will be something and you will be the youngest, whatever. And I kept telling her and she didn't believe it. So I then decided, then she texted me and she said, I'm running under the opposition, the UDC is an umbrella, umbrella for democratic change. And then she said to me, I've had 2 worst debates, you know, because I've lived in South Africa for so long, my Tswana is gone and they are judging me on the language. I said, okay, I need to come to Botswana. You are winning this, not under my watch. If I must come and campaign for you, that's what I'll do. So obviously we didn't have the money. So now I have to get the money myself to go and support her. She's a woman. I mean, they will support men. And then I was also clear, I'm not going there without my husband because I don't know if they'll arrest me or not. So I need someone that's close to me. So we went to Botswana and we campaigned. I think for me, the first thing I did was to squash this thing of saying you need to be a good debater to be an MP. Obama was the best speaker. He did nothing for African Americans, let alone for this continent, but he speaks well. So it's the first thing I squashed. And I used him as an example because they love him. And then I centralized the politics to Southern Africa. Southern Africa has by far the best infrastructure in Africa thus far. Because we were all of us were settler colony. But we were all run by one-party dictatorships for the last 30, 40 years. And I said it's high time. When they got the party that was still in power, I was 4 years old. I'm 62 now. So, cut a long story short, my Pilos constituency is large because it includes Gaborone, the central district. And she's the youngest to ever run. Now let me tell you, she won. She campaigned to be an MP. Because they won the majority, she won't even be an MP. She's going to be a minister. When I spoke in her rally, it was last week Thursday, the leader of the umbrella party, Tumabokwe, was like, mine is on Saturday, speak in mine. And I said, I'm not talking in your rally. I'm going home as is scheduled, which was on Friday. I said to him, you will call me in your inauguration as the president of Botswana. He said, how? I said, I am telling you, you will call me. When I ran out and the AU esteemed member was talking, I had that call because he is now the president of Botswana. So Chimwewe, I hope that we have a gala, albeit how small it is. We need to celebrate Botswana. 58 years of the BDP, they've dislodged them today. But they dislodged them because they did it the African way. They didn't campaign like it has happened in South Africa or in Kenya as individual. Opposition came together under one umbrella, under one message, one opposition, and I think we have a lesson to learn. When I saw her, when she came to sit down, I said, she was saying to me, I ran on a woman, whatever. I said, no, I'm in your campaign next year. You're running for a constituency, not as a woman, anything. So, and I think the last thing I want to say is, I went to Botswana knowing that the ANC-led government in South Africa will not come and take me out of Botswana if I get arrested. I actually gave your name to them that if I'm arrested, speak to Eunice. And I also gave Nsiki Mazwai's number. She knows her, top podcaster in South Africa. I said, if I'm arrested, phone these 2 women because my government won't come and take me out. They won't come and take me out also if anything happens to me next year when I campaign for you. But I'm going to do it. So I think What we are learning from this is that the ruling parties, the men are doing it because when I got to Botswana, the ANC and Zimbabwe Mnangagwa had just sent people to decampaign opposition. I went there to salvage opposition. So we need to start doing this for each other. We need to start campaigning for women. We need to cross these borders. And if you must live in that village for 1 month, live in that village for 1 month and campaign for that woman. So I think that's what I wanted to share. But I am emotional, so you can share our tables.
So how do I go after that? I think I shouldn't. Anyway, solidarity missions to countries preparing for elections, which she has spoken about. We also felt that we needed to speak about breaking the silence on violence against women. Earlier, Ambassador Salah said that he grew up not knowing rape. That's not true. There was a lot of silence during those days. We also felt that we need to decolonize the way we come to our knowings. All of us here, many of us here have leadership development programs, but we need to rethink them because the way we have been rolling them out needs to change. We also talked about funding. In our group, we are agreed, and you may not agree with us, that we'll get funding from anywhere and do the right thing with that funding. So we spoke about reparations, and we are going to champion that cause. Finally, we felt that we needed more feminist platforms to make women meet. Honorable Nima has met Honorable Shabalala, and we are all going to come and camp in Bukoba for the constituency. Yeah. Finally, similar to this group, we're going to scout, recruit, establish a database, mentor progressive and feminist women. Thank you. Which other one did I miss? I did.
Thank you very much. That was so powerful. And Marsha Balala, you've created a follower in me. So when I want to know what my wife is up to next, I'll definitely come speak to you because it seems your connection with the ancestors is unparalleled. Now, we've eaten into time. We should have ended by now because there's another session happening in this room. I don't mean to put pressure on our panelists, but I want them to just give us very, very brief parting thoughts, not more than a minute, based on everything you've heard. Just one idea that you would love to embrace and run with. And we'll go in that order from Honorable Nema, who has already recruited campaigners here for next year, and finish with
Well, thank you very much. I must, however, put a caveat. The political landscape for the general election has not yet started. It will start next year when our parliament is dissolved. So until such point, I remain silent into what journey, but I welcome all the support that will be extended. I just have quick points that I'm just going to do very quickly. Number one, when you talk about GBV in election, we must remember online gender-based violence, the technology facilitated gender-based violence. I saw in the morning presentation, there was a list of types of gender-based violence, but online gender-based violence was not there. We need to continuously put it there. Number two is artificial intelligence, the threat of artificial intelligence and democracy, and how it intensifies gender-based violence, online gender-based violence. And I'm pleased to tell you that on 17th October this year, I'm the co-rapporteur of the Interparliamentary Union resolution. Interparliamentary Union is a parliament of parliaments. 180 parliaments from 180 countries are members. So the Interparliamentary Union passed or adopted a resolution known as the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And the next stage is now to get that resolution to be implemented in these 180 parliaments. So I think that's an opportunity for many of you here, and I welcome that opportunity because I'm the co-rapporteur with an MP from Michelle, and we can collaborate in that. Number three is women in politics. it has been recognized that the more women in politics that we have, the more it contributes to development. So I don't know how many of you have gone out or have read or referred to the new World Bank gender strategy. World Bank has a new strategy, gender strategy, 2026 to 2030. One of the pillars is women in politics. So that goes to show how the world is now recognizing the importance of women in politics. Fourth one, very quickly, is I think that feminist organizations need to work with sitting women members of parliament and sitting women councillors, because a lot of the things we're talking about today, if they need legislation change, you need the women who sit there to actually understand and to be able to do it. I have a classic example. The achievements that I told you in our Political Parties Act and election legislation, I worked hand in hand with civil society organization and feminist organization like TNGP and others. So I think it's very important to support us when we come forward to ask support. Finally, we need to create a space where we can have inclusion for NGOs at community level that are doing the work. Because oftentimes, continental organization will work amongst continental, and if it's national organization, it will just be the big national organizations, but at the grassroots community level, those organizations don't know how to either get in or get the support. And I'll end with an example. I have an NGO called Omuka Hub, and one of the things that we do is to enhance the women participation in politics. So for the last year, we have been working at the grassroots to get women and community to understand the legislation change and to come forward and vie during the local government election, because often the excuse is women don't come forward. And I can tell you that in this year's local government election, the party primaries in our party, in my area, the flow of women who came forward to take those forms hadn't happened. And that happened across the country within our party because of the political will and the push. So I think we need to support grassroots organization in that sense. Thank you.
Okay. So there's one thing that we've been talking about. We're at a Pan-Africanist gathering, and one thing that I wish to sort of remind us of, or really to think about it seriously, is the idea, the concept, or rather the manifestation of Pan-Africanism that has emerged vis-a-vis other ideas and imaginations that our foremothers and our forefathers had around what Pan-Africanism actually looks like or what it should look like. So far we have taken on a neoliberal approach to Pan-African, sort of Pan-Africanism in the continent. And I think that is something that we need to really think about. It's the same thing with around how we've been conceptualizing democracy, right? We know that democracy is not necessarily a Western concept. We've had African communities and African villages prior to colonization that had democratic practices, in a sense, so we know this. But then it was the form of democracy that was practiced then that is very much different from the type of democracy that is practiced now. And I think it's important for us to engage the kind of democracy that we really need to think about and do away with corporatocracy, which is basically democracy that is about corporations and not democracy about the people. So that's one thing that I'm just calling up. And then of course, women need to take leadership. As my colleague have mentioned that studies have shown that women do improve governance. Women also challenge the existing networks of corruption, that men have set up to basically continuously loot states. So when women go into those spaces, they challenge and disrupt some of those networks. So it is important for good governance to have women in leadership, right? Of course, this does not say that, some of us may be corruptible, but in a sense, studies have shown the presence of women does improve governance. And then of course, with, the quotas, we know all of us that quotas work, definitely. And I think it's important that all of our countries actually legislate quota systems and that we demand 50%, right, 50-50. But at the same time, this means, sort of involving electoral bodies to make sure that also the specific rules around how we list women, right, particularly who are going to run for office. Because in some instances, as we've seen in Senegal, despite a legislated 50% quota system, right, a quota rule, I mean, they've really, not performed and reached the 50%. And the reason that is linked to the party listing system that they have. So in a sense, the zebra model, perhaps it's something also that needs to be enforced. And then the other thing is, let's criminalize violence against women in politics. And certainly there should be repercussions for violence of women against politics, especially in the digital space. Because as we've seen, I know in the South African space, the sister that you've mentioned, a lot of violence actually does take place in the spaces like Twitter, right? Where women really, their dignities are challenged. And the other thing, just lastly, spaces like this are wonderful. And it's wonderful that we have so much diversity in terms of our representation of the countries that we come from. And I'm hoping with, what we have seen here, I'm hoping that other people, other women in this country, in this space, will collectively share our own experiences. I know in South Africa, we struggle with land. And just the other day, I was saying, I think South Africa requires a referendum on land. And I'm hoping that the other sisters in this room will be able to talk about how ownership, yes, right, how ownership of land, of having land actually helps women survive the violent, modern, colonial, capitalist system that we exist in. And I think all of us, if you go back and look at what happened during COVID, right, the COVID crisis and how economies were closed, it is in countries where women actually had access to land and they were able to, produce food, etc., that enabled them to cushion the impact of the crisis of COVID. So land is very much important. I'm really hoping that we rally all of you to come and support South Africa in getting its land back. And now this goes back to just one last the aspect around representation of women in the media. So the media as an apparatus of a capitalist state, what it does is it silences and marginalizes voices that go against neoliberal capitalist agenda. So if you're going to go into the media to be interviewed there as a political analyst and you say something that will shake the status quo, you will not be invited ever again. So that's the other thing that we need to be mindful of, right? And I think this is where, again, the solidarity then comes in. So if you see a video of Mechabalal, if I see a video of Chimwemwe saying something, then that's when we share, right? That's literally because the conscientization happens there, because the media is a powerful ideological apparatus of any capitalist state. It is what has been used to normalize this kind of life and existence as if there's no other way of existence that can actually come into existence. I leave it there. Thank you very much.
It's very difficult to go after that. But very quickly, I want to first start by challenging us and asking ourselves, how many of us, or when was the last time we looked at the AU Agenda 2063? So I recently asked someone, why aren't we sharing and owning the AU Agenda 2063 as much as we are doing with the UN SDGs 2030? And they told me, I don't have funding. And I said, who gave you funding to share the Bible that you share every day? But because I love what I do, I will not continue that conversation, was my thought. So these are some of the things that when we talk about sharing them, it starts by owning the very spaces that we already have and the very platforms that we already have, even as we are trying to go out and get more. So we need to have a conversation about our own, and that starts with the AU 2063 agenda. Otherwise, that gap between the top leadership at the AU and the locals will never be bridged. The second thing I wanted to share was on our educational curriculum. I don't know about the rest of you, but recently in Kenya we have something called the CBC. It's a curriculum that was recently changed, meant to be very practical. And one of the things you see in their books is when they're giving examples of politicians, they will always paint the photo of a gentleman. When they are talking about history, there's very little on Africa's history and some of the Pan-Africanists that we need to have a conversation about. So while we are discussing this and convening, can we have this, some of these stakeholders within the education sector so that it is a holistic attack as we are having these conversations here, they are having them at the schools as well. We are having them at the family unit as well, so that it's not a situation whereby we are training all these things, but it's all being deconstructed in schools. We also have the issue of, when we are talking about political parties, we have sexual harassment and sexual corruption. I choose to put the two of them separately because while sexual harassment is one thing, and I think we all know that I don't need to explain it, sexual corruption is one where I'm choosing to term it because very recently the defense has been, but I didn't force her. The defense has been, it was consensual. But it is a form of corruption because I may not have consented to it, but you gave me an option of what they're calling bad table manners. If you do not have the money, you do not have the parcel of land, you've got something else you can give me. Is that really consent? So because when you go to court, it's a bit difficult to then say that I was forced. Then I was asked for a bribe. There is sexual corruption that is then going on. So are we able to put labels to some of these things that are happening to us, and we are finding it difficult to legally prove them? Because that is where they're beating us to the punch. When we talk about pushing for affirmative action, we must also push for the support for those affirmative actions. In Kenya, a year later after we started having the women representative seat, they did not have, in 2 minutes I'll be done, they did not have funds. They did not have funds. So we need to also push for support for that. Mental health, even as we go on with our activism, we've seen a lot of women who have fallen out of the leadership spaces because they didn't have the exact support. Some of them have gone into depression, some of them have committed suicide. So can we also have the spaces for mental health? Arenas for women, it's going to be very difficult. That's my second slide, not over. Arenas for women so that we are able to have young women, even with children, participating in some of these activities. I know development partners where women are headed can equally say, we are going to provide room for you to come with your nanny. But it's a very difficult conversation with some of the organizations, and that's something that we need to address. And lastly, in Iceland in 1975, they had something called a Women's Day Off. They chose not to call it a strike, where all the women decided we're not going to work, we're not doing anything. And for the first time in Iceland, they were able to see men going with children to work. They were able to see men queuing for, noodles and sausages until they ran out of them because that's all they could prepare. And just that one day was enough for them to be able to say, okay, they do a lot for our nation. Point taken, whatever you need us to do, we will do. So those are some of the, informal ways that we can push our activism.
Thank you very much. We literally have 9 minutes for our closing. Deus.
I thought you had already completed your coup, and I was just going to leave the table.
Any last words?
I don't think I make any last words. The job, as I said earlier, was to make all of you speak. So let me just say thank you very much for tolerating me for the last couple of hours. We started late, but I'm glad we've come to an end. I hope you found something useful out of this conversation. And out of respect for everyone's time, I'll not say any more than to say, Sawubona.
Thank you very much, our esteemed panelists, for dropping so much knowledge that we need to grapple with and take forward. Thank you. A round of applause for them, please. While they take their seats, please note that we have a Mentimeter going on. It's just got 2 questions. We are asking what leadership programs do we have on the continent, who is hosting them, but also which of these have impacted you, as a way of taking all the recommendations you have made forward. Please make sure that you share your notes with us of the strategies that you discussed at the desk so that we can capture them. So at this juncture, we would like to, we're getting into the concluding bit. We have two powerful women in the room that will be speaking to us. And as I invite them, I just want to highlight that we ought to recognize that political agency and leadership do not lie in elected offices only, right? So it's all of this we are talking about has got to do with the different spaces that we do exist. And of course, there's a bit more that can be added to that, but let's not forget that. And so with that said, it is my utmost pleasure to invite Margaret Milwa from Ford Foundation to give us some solidarity remarks, which will be followed by Desta Tilahun, who sits on the Ethiopian Women's Political Joint Council, to give us our closing remarks. Thank you.